Our oceans are dying and faster than anyone dares to admit. Every year, more than 1,000 oil spills, big and small, happen across the planet. Take the Exxon Valdez spill in 1989, where 41 million liters of oil killed more than 250,000 seabirds and wiped out 22 fish species, or the Hebei Spirit spill in 2007, which left 400 square kilometers of South Korea's coastline suffocating and thousands of residents suffering from respiratory illnesses. Humans were completely helpless. There was no way to clean up all the oil. That was true until scientists discovered tiny organisms so small that 10,000 of them could fit on the head of a needle, yet they possessed an ability humanity never had. They eat oil, break it down right in the seawater, and multiply like an invisible army whenever oil appears. Who are these organisms, and how do they consume oil? Let's begin this documentary right now. Do you remember Deepwater Horizon? Yes, the biggest oil spill in human history. On the 20th of April 2010, the $560 million Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded in the middle of the night in the Gulf of Mexico. A fire as tall as a 20-story building tore through the sky, thick with the smell of chemicals. 2 days later, the rig sank to the bottom of the ocean, more than 5,000 feet deep, taking 11 workers who never came back. And worse, the one device meant to keep everything safe, the BOP valve, failed. That meant the well began erupting like a black volcano, non-stop, uncontrollable, for 87 straight days, nearly 3 months. A total of 779 million liters of crude oil poured out 12 times higher than the first estimates, creating the largest uncontrolled oil flow in human history. To help you picture how much oil that is, imagine the amount of water the entire city of New York uses in more than 12 hours. The oil spread across the coasts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. Ocean waves turned a metallic black. White sand beaches became toxic sludge. In some places, the oil was so thick, people could scoop it up like wet clay. In methane-choked waters, fish, turtles, and dolphins surfaced for one last breath and then sank, never to rise again. And it wasn't just oil. 275,000 tons of natural gas were released too, forming underwater plumes of toxic bubbles stretching for dozens of miles. Together, they created an ecological disaster unlike anything ever seen. The U.S. deployed every resource available. Thousands of boats, tens of thousands of workers, floating barriers, oil skimmers, controlled burns on the ocean's surface, and millions of liters of Corexit. But all those desperate efforts recovered only 15–25% of the total oil. The remaining 75% simply disappeared, defying every rule of physics. "We searched everywhere," oceanographer Samantha Joy recalled, "but the oil just wasn't where it should have been. Computer models failed. NASA satellites couldn't find oil on the surface. Underwater robots scanned every meter of the seafloor, but the predicted oil layer was nowhere to be seen. Instead, at depths of 1,500 to 2,000 meters, oil levels were 100 to 500 times lower than expected, prompting one engineer to blurt out during a meeting, "Where did it go? Who or what ate it?" When no one could explain where hundreds of millions of liters of oil in the Gulf of Mexico had gone, scientists were forced to expand their investigation beyond the ocean. And surprisingly, the most important clue didn't come from the sea at all. It came from a quiet lake in Ontario, Canada, where there are no tsunamis, no ocean currents, and no deep-sea pressure thousands of meters below. So why did oil disappear there? In 2021, at the Experimental Lakes Area Research Site, scientists built a barrier around part of the shoreline and poured in a controlled amount of crude oil, recreating the conditions of a small spill. After 72 hours, they cleaned the area using the same methods humans always rely on during disasters: skimming surface oil, collecting residue, washing the shoreline. But the result was identical to Deepwater Horizon. A layer of oil remained, impossible to remove, weaving through the water and soaking deep into the sediment. From there, the real observation began. For months on end, throughout summer, fall, and even winter, the research team collected water and sediment samples to track changes in the ecosystem. And then something strange happened. Within just a few days, the lake's bacterial community changed so dramatically it was almost unrecognizable. Species that were once so rare no one paid attention to them suddenly appeared in overwhelming numbers, taking over the entire oil-contaminated area. When scientists analyzed their DNA, they discovered these species carried enzymes capable of breaking down hydrocarbons, the primary building blocks of crude oil. But what shocked scientists the most wasn't that bacteria could eat oil, it was the fact that they had been doing this millions of years ago, long before humans ever discovered petroleum. Every year, more than 1.3 million tons of oil naturally leak from cracks on the ocean floor. Oil has been flowing into the sea since the age of dinosaurs, and in this hydrocarbon-rich environment, a special group of microorganisms evolved to turn one of the planet's most toxic substances into food. They are not accidental heroes, they are the product of tens of millions of years of natural selection. The most well-known species, like Alcanovirax borcumensis, Marinobacter, and Cycloclasticus, function like perfect biological machines. They sense oil molecules from a distance, move toward higher concentrations as if guided by radar, and activate hydrocarbon-breaking enzymes so powerful they outperform many modern oil treatment technologies. So, how do they actually eat oil? Contrary to what many people think, no single species of bacteria can break down all crude oil. Oil is a mixture of hundreds of different hydrocarbon structures, from simple, straight chains to tough aromatic rings that even refineries need extremely high heat to break apart. So nature created a smarter solution. A microbial assembly line made up of many species working together, each group responsible for a different part of the job. When oil appears in the water, the first arrivals are the opening bacteria, like Alcanovirax borcumensis. They detect hydrocarbon molecules from afar through a process called chemotaxis, basically, like smelling a very strong scent. The cells immediately swim toward the oil-rich water and release alkane monooxygenase, an enzyme capable of cutting long alkane chains into smaller pieces. One marine biologist described it this way: if you imagine oil as a long steel chain, their enzyme works like a pair of cutters snipping it apart non-stop. As soon as Alcanovirax finishes its part, the smaller fragments become food for the second wave, usually species like Marinobacter and Oleospira. They continue breaking down the intermediate molecules, attacking the more complex carbon structures. Finally, the finisher bacteria, such as Cycloclasticus, process the toughest aromatic rings and convert them into completely harmless compounds. The last step is oxidation. The carbon in oil is transformed into dissolved CO2 and water, and a small remaining portion becomes bacterial biomass, which is essentially bacterial tissue. But the most impressive part isn't the process, it's the speed. Under the right conditions, with enough oxygen and enough oil, the population of oil-eating bacteria can increase 300 to 500 times in just a few weeks. Their growth is so fast that one NOAA researcher said, "They respond like a wildfire that's been given more wind." And just like a wildfire, they spread exactly where the oil moves, forming an invisible army that follows every current. They consume everything in oil: alkanes, cycloalkanes, aromatic hydrocarbons, and even some molecules that refineries struggle to break apart. The incredible thing is that this entire process produces no toxins, only CO2, water, and bacterial biomass. No smoke, no toxic sludge, no residue. The oil, quite literally, disappears. This also explains why no single species can do the job alone. Nature designed this system like a complete assembly line. Each species is one link, and only when all of them work together can oil be fully broken down. If a small lake in the Canadian forest can trigger an army of oil-eating bacteria, then what would happen in an ocean spanning millions of square kilometers? Is that mechanism strong enough to handle a disaster on the scale of Deepwater Horizon? The answer, surprising but unmistakably clear, yes. And in the Gulf of Mexico, it is far stronger. The Gulf of Mexico is not an ordinary body of water. It contains more than 1,000 natural oil seeps, where crude oil drips into the ocean every day, not for years, but for millions of years. This has turned the region into Earth's natural immune system, a place where oil-eating bacteria don't just exist, they've become an elite force. But that's not all. The Gulf of Mexico is also the heart of the U.S. oil and gas industry. That means the area is constantly exposed to tiny amounts of oil leaking from ships, pipelines, and extraction activities. For bacteria, this is like receiving microbial vaccines, regular, continuous doses that have trained them for decades. From an immunology perspective, this is similar to how humans build immunity. Repeated, low-level exposure makes the defense system stronger over time. In the Gulf of Mexico, nature itself has been vaccinating the ocean with oil, allowing oil-degrading bacteria to become faster, tougher, and far more efficient than anywhere else on Earth. So when the Deepwater Horizon explosion happened and massive amounts of oil began pouring into the sea, the bacterial army didn't need time to adapt. They were already used to oil. They had evolved because of oil. They had been trained long before the disaster arrived. But there was one factor that, at the time, almost no one in the world noticed: temperature. Oil-eating bacteria are not cold warriors. They are warm-loving organisms that work most effectively at 20-30 degrees Celsius, 68-86 degrees Fahrenheit. The Gulf of Mexico, hot, humid, and rarely below 20 degrees Celsius, became a biological pressure cooker, where the bacteria's oil-consuming speed skyrocketed to unimaginable levels. As long as oil and oxygen were present, they multiplied 300-500 times in just a few weeks, a rate one researcher described as, if you blink once, their numbers have already doubled. To understand how dramatic this difference is, look at the Exxon Valdez disaster in Alaska in 1989. 3 decades have passed, yet the oil still sits beneath the cold sand, thick, black, almost untouched. Scientists can still scoop out chunks of oil with a shovel, as if time stopped on the shores of Prince William Sound. Why? Because cold water makes bacterial activity collapse, their enzymes freeze, and the entire degradation process slows to nearly zero. Meanwhile, in the Gulf of Mexico, warm temperatures turned these bacteria into biological turbo machines. Microbiologist Terry Hazen once said a line that sent chills through the scientific community. In Alaska, bacteria hibernate. In the Gulf of Mexico, they feast. Yes, one of the worst oil disasters in history happened in the very place where nature itself had the strongest ability to fight back. A strange, ironic twist of the planet. But even though the rate of oil breakdown was recorded as extremely fast, one thing left the entire scientific community baffled: the amount of oil that disappeared was too large and too fast. So fast that computer models, radar systems, and even deep-sea robots simply couldn't keep up with reality. The numbers on paper said the seafloor should have been buried under thick layers of oil, but field data insisted the opposite was true. And then, when the robots were lowered to depths of 1,000, 1,300 meters into a realm of eternal darkness, their cameras captured a scene that made the entire research team freeze in silence. The seafloor was completely clean. No oil walls, no oil blankets, no signs of the predicted black desert. Instead, suspended in the water column, they saw a massive, shadowy structure, dark, dense, drifting like the silhouette of a sleeping leviathan, hidden in the ocean's depths. This was the oil plume, a colossal cloud of dispersed oil 35 kilometers long, 3 kilometers wide, and 200 meters thick. A formation no one ever imagined oil could create, not floating, not sinking, but drifting through the ocean like an invisible storm. One researcher whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." It felt like the ocean was hiding a secret we weren't smart enough to understand. But the strangest part wasn't the plume itself. When water samples from the cloud were analyzed, hydrocarbon levels were 100 to 500 times lower than expected. That should have been impossible. Unless someone, or more accurately, something had eaten most of the oil while the robots were watching. The answer came from strange organisms living in the deep. Oil-eating bacteria, species almost unknown to humanity before 2010. They live where there is no light, where temperatures hover just above freezing, and where pressure is strong enough to crush steel. Yet they survive, and not just survive, they eat oil, break it apart, and convert it into energy, like an invisible army quietly cleaning up the largest environmental disaster of our time. However, when the army of oil-eating bacteria exploded across the floor of the Gulf of Mexico, their dark side quickly revealed itself. Growing 300-500 times in just a few weeks meant one thing: they needed oxygen. A lot of oxygen. When trillions upon trillions of bacteria simultaneously broke down oil, they drained the dissolved oxygen in the water, creating dead zones where no fish, no shrimp, no sea turtles could survive. NOAA recorded oxygen levels in some areas dropping by 30–50%, enough to kill species normally adapted to harsh environments. One researcher noted, "They eat the oil, but they also eat the ecosystem around it." But that was only the beginning. Scattered across the Gulf of Mexico are more than 2,000 shipwrecks, some 300–500 years old, priceless underwater archaeological treasures. No one imagined an invisible group of microorganisms could threaten them until steel samples taken from several wrecks showed abnormally fast corrosion. The reason? Some oil-degrading bacteria produce fatty acids and sulfur compounds, substances that chew through metal far faster than natural corrosion. One marine archaeologist even warned, ships that survived centuries of storms may not survive this microbial attack. Oil and gas infrastructure faces the same danger. Pipelines, valves, drilling platforms, all engineered to withstand extreme pressure, can be silently weakened by the very organisms we praise as cleanup heroes. Studies from 2014, 2018 showed that sulfur-producing bacteria can accelerate steel corrosion by 5 to 20 times, threatening the safety of the entire deep-sea extraction network. Deepwater Horizon wasn't just an environmental disaster. It was a shock that changed the oil industry forever. After 2010, the U.S. introduced sweeping new regulations for deep-sea drilling, safety monitoring, and BOP valve design. Well capping technology was completely redesigned, and AUV robots began patrolling for leaks in real time, something almost no one paid attention to before. Faced with the mysterious disappearance of such massive amounts of oil, many countries and tech corporations believed they could take a shortcut by boosting nature, accelerating the activity of oil-eating bacteria even further. The first idea was to introduce artificial microbes, lab-grown strains optimized to break down hydrocarbons. In the lab, they worked perfectly, but in the ocean, a complete failure. Once released into the real environment, the native microbial communities already trained by millions of years of natural oil seepage immediately took over. They multiplied so fast, consuming all available oxygen and nutrients, that the artificial bacteria never had a chance to function and were pushed out of the ecosystem entirely. The second attempt was to fertilize the ocean, adding nitrogen and phosphorus to feed the bacteria and help them break down oil faster. Some areas showed small positive effects, but the results were far slower than expected. You can't turn a bacterium into an industrial shredder just by feeding it more, one microbiologist joked. In many cases, over-fertilization even caused mild eutrophication, reducing oxygen and making the situation more complicated. In the end, scientists realized the natural limits of biology. No matter how powerful they are, bacteria cannot degrade oil faster than a certain threshold, because if they evolve beyond that point, they would also begin eating other hydrocarbon-based materials, such as asphalt, resin plastics, or even coastal construction materials. A technical report from the EPA once warned, if bacteria could break down crude oil instantly, they could also break down human infrastructure. Nature imposes limits for a reason. These repeated failures forced the scientific community to accept a crucial truth. Earth already has its own oil degradation system, and any attempt to replace it or accelerate it excessively will lead to consequences we cannot control. In our imagination, oil on the seafloor can only create a massive dead zone. Yet when scientists ventured deep into the Gulf of Mexico, they discovered a reality completely opposite. There are places where oil does not destroy life. It nourishes an entire thriving world. At depths beyond 3,000 meters, where pressure can crush steel and darkness is eternal, lie what scientists call asphalt volcanoes. These are natural oil seeps that have leaked and hardened over thousands of years, forming black, glossy rivers frozen in time like solidified lava. According to NOAA, there are more than 50 such structures in the Gulf of Mexico alone. And the strangest part? The very material humans consider a toxic pollutant has become the foundation for an ecosystem so vibrant it seems impossible. When USGS submersible robots shined their lights onto these asphalt formations for the first time, they didn't see a dead zone. They saw an explosion of life. Dense mats of mussels clung to the glossy black surfaces like miniature cities. Bright red crabs crawled in swarms along the hardened oil fissures. Tube worms nearly a meter long anchored themselves deep into the asphalt as if it were fertile soil. Even deep-sea sponges and corals grew in clusters beside this substance that humanity labels as ecological poison. This wasn't life, barely hanging on. It was a stable, energetic ecosystem that had thrived for thousands of years. But the real secret wasn't in the shapes or the abundance of these animals. It was inside their bodies. None of these species eat oil directly. Instead, they host tiny workers, symbiotic bacteria. These microbes live inside their tissues, breaking down hydrocarbons and methane into energy, functioning like miniature biological factories. The bacteria absorb oil, convert it into nutrients and energy, and feed it back to their host. If the ocean has been training armies of oil-eating microbes for millions of years, then can humans learn from nature? And the answer is yes, but we may not be ready for what we are about to unleash. Over the past decade, biotechnology has undergone a revolution. Scientists realize that oil is not an untouchable substance. It is simply a hydrocarbon chain, and every chain has a weakness. One of the most groundbreaking discoveries came from the world of fungi. In a small laboratory at the University of Montana, biologists tested several fungal species from the Aspergillus genus. The results left the entire team silent. The fungi not only survived in motor oil, but also broke it down into light fatty acids and non-toxic compounds. It was like watching a biological recycling furnace operate inside a glass beaker, one researcher said. But the true turning point came in 2016, when a Japanese research team discovered Ideonella sakaiensis, a bacterium capable of eating PET, the world's most common plastic, and turning an entire bottle into simple sugars in just 24 hours. Compared to the 450 years nature normally needs to break down PET, this ability felt like technology from the future. Scientists later improved its PETase enzyme performance many times over using protein engineering techniques. A future where plastic waste is eaten clean no longer feels like science fiction. By 2022, a research group at Bangkok University pushed the boundary even further. They developed 3 forms of commercial bioremediation products based on natural oil-eating bacteria: a liquid solution for soil, a microbial immobilized granule for sand, and a specialized water treatment fluid for oil contamination. This was the first time a commercial technology was built using nature's own biological weapons to address oil spill disasters. But every breakthrough comes with risks. Lab-enhanced bacteria could become dangerous if they escape into the environment. Many experts warn that if such microbes proliferate near oil refineries or pipelines, their accelerated hydrocarbon-degrading abilities could cause corrosion, infrastructure failures, or worse, trigger reaction chains humans cannot control. You can't order bacteria to stop, cautioned Dr. Gary King. Once they find an energy source, they will keep breaking it down, whether it's spilled oil or a billion-dollar pipeline. In the end, when we look back at this entire journey, we realize a truth that is paradoxical yet strangely beautiful. The ocean is both our victim and our silent savior. Ancient bacteria, asphalt, black reefs, and even sunlight, all of them working together to fight against the very disaster humans created. But one question remains: can nature keep saving us forever? Or will it one day reach its limit? What do you think about the ocean's ability to heal itself? Leave a comment below. I want to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy stories that feel impossible but absolutely real, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.